Electric vehicles are seen as the future of mobility in Canada. In an effort to reach emissions targets, federal and provincial governments are rolling out initiatives to increase the share of electric vehicles. The Quebec government is actively encouraging the sale of electric vehicles through small exemptions given to drivers, such as permitting them to drive in carpool lanes and waiving fees for those cars at toll bridges and roads. In addition to these smaller incentives, Quebec has two major policies regarding electrification of vehicles. The first is a supply-focused policy geared at producers of electric vehicles, which requires 3.5% of all vehicles sold in Quebec to be either electric or plug-in hybrids. By 2025, this share of electric vehicles must increase to 22%. Any manufacturer that does not reach this quota will be required to purchase credits from the government or from another manufacturer that has sold a surplus of electric vehicles. Quebec's other major electric vehicle policy is a demand-focused one, designed to encourage consumers to purchase electric vehicles. Residents who enroll in the Drive Electric program are eligible to receive as much as $8,000 in a rebate for their new electric vehicle and a $600 rebate for the purchase of a private charging station. With these policies, the Quebec government aims to have at least 100,000 new electric vehicles on the road by 2020 and 1 million by 2030. Research groups estimate that the subsidy programs will cost between $4.6 and $8.6 billion, a sizable amount when considering that many other forms of transportation are in need of more funding. The Quebec Premier's Advisory Committee is recommending the subsidy is increased even more, despite numerous think tanks and research organizations cautioning against the ineffective nature of this subsidy. In reports published during the spring of 2017, both the Montreal Economic Institute and EcoFiscal, a McGill-based group of policy advisors, cited Quebec's provincial subsidies as the most expensive and least effective way to help cut provincial greenhouse gas emissions. Perhaps the most problematic aspect of Quebec's Drive Electric subsidy is the perpetuation of private vehicle ownership that it encourages. Breaking down the internal and external costs of putting more electric vehicles on the road helps to more easily understand why this is so problematic. Internal costs are those monetized costs borne on the purchaser. In the case of electric vehicles, it includes the cost of electricity used to charge the car, insurance costs for the driver, any repairs and maintenance the car requires over its lifetime, such as replacement battery packs, as well as the ticket price for the purchase of the vehicle. Quebec's subsidy is in place to mitigate a portion of that last internal cost. The external costs are those costs which are borne in society as a consequence of more electric vehicles being produced and used. Some of these negative externalities associated with private vehicle ownership and electric vehicles are traffic congestion, parking lots in public space, serious or fatal car crashes, as well as pollution. The common association of electric vehicles being emission-free is a misleading statement that fails to take into account the fixed external costs associated with the emissions produced in the manufacturing of the vehicle, the greenhouse gases produced in the charging of the car, and the eventual waste that will be generated once the vehicle's life is over and its parts need to be disposed of. The current subsidy offered by the Quebec government does nothing to internalize these negative external costs of increased private vehicle ownership of electric vehicles. Equity-based concerns about Quebec's subsidy are also arising. EcoFiscal has openly criticized the government for providing a subsidy on what are essentially luxury vehicles, which lower-income Quebecers cannot afford. The Montreal Economic Institute emphasizes the unnecessary excess of the subsidy further through the research that shows as many as half of those who have already bought an electric car in Quebec would have done so without the subsidy, in effect costing the government a lot of money to convince people to do something that they would have done anyway. Other governments are using different policies to help induce demand for electric vehicles. Norway is leading the world in electric vehicle ownership, with these cars accounting for almost 40% of all new vehicle sales. Compared to the Quebec government, which essentially only offers incentives to buy electric vehicles, the Norwegian government uses a combination of carrots and sticks to encourage a switch from internal combustion engine to electric cars. Norway offers many of the same smaller incentives, such as exemptions from road and bridge tolls and access to carpool lanes, in addition to other incentives such as free parking and waived vehicle registration costs. These incentives are paired with deterrents to purchasing gas and diesel-powered vehicles. For example, gas and diesel-powered vehicles are subject to a 25% VAT tax, which electric vehicles are exempt from. As well, gas in Norway is highly taxed, about 2.5 times as expensive as gas in Quebec. With these points in mind, the Quebec government needs to reconsider the efficacy of its electric vehicle subsidies and consider pairing any future electric vehicle incentives with additional deterrents to purchasing conventional combustion engine vehicles.